the Church of Scientology so afraid of?
This is SPTV.
Yeah, what are they so afraid of? Hello and welcome to Surviving Scientology. Hold on, I'm getting some feedback. Just give me a minute, folks. We have a technical difficulty here. And okay, that's better. We're back. Okay, so welcome to Surviving Scientology. We were getting something from bleeding over from a multiverse, I guess. This is Surviving Scientology, part of SVTV. We've been around since 2012. That's my wife, Karen, and I broadcasting on YouTube. Tonight, a very special, important show, especially right now, given the amount of fair game that the Church of Scientology is putting out. I'm your host, Jeffrey Augustine, and I wanted to present a history of Scientology's fair game, dirty contracts. Where did it all start? Because when you talk about Scientology, you want to go back to the origins. It's good to cover what's happening right now with 2023. Aaron Smith-Levin did a program today live this morning, which was really interesting. It had Mike Rinder talking to Jan Wenner, editor of Rolling Stone, about how unhappy Tom Cruise was with Janet Reitman's story. And Tom was so unhappy, he was trying to get Mike Rinder and Scientology, who Mike Rinder was then commanding officer, Scientology's notorious Office of Special Affairs, which we'll discuss. He was trying to get them to either kill the story or make it a happy story about Scientology that Janet Reitman was doing for Rolling Stone. And Karen and I want to say hello to Janet Reitman. We're your biggest fans. And I read with Janet back when she was researching it, and as did a lot of other people. Great writer. And so I want to give some context because it's so important. And when you look at Scientology, you do want to go back to the origins. And at any given time, Scientology is always subject to change. And so something that L. Ron Hubbard or David Miscavige said at one point in time can change. And one interesting thing at ex-Scientology members board, and you would type in ESMB Redux, REDUX, if you want to read ex-Scientology members board. A poster there named Hell of a Hoax, brilliant, funny guy. He's come out with a law about, for everything that L. Ron Hubbard said, there's an equal and opposite thing that he said. So, but today we're going to get into some real serious issues that'll be good for researchers, scholars, attorneys, and other people, because today we did see the judge take Jane Doe's motion under consideration about being able to question Julian Schwartz. So there's a lot of things going on, and I'm going to weave them together with information. So I'm going to start with basically, this is a program, and this is sort of where the context of fair game begins. And let me go to my, just a minute. I want to go to something here. Okay, this is a program that's been out for a while, and it was launched. It's really interesting. This was launched in 30 April 2006, and this is something that people don't think about when they think about fair game, and that's going to be what I'm going to argue. It says OSA must form up, get on purpose, and accomplish its valuable final product, that's what VFP means, of establishing the indispensability of Scientology. This is really part of the core of fair game, of establishing the indispensability of Scientology. And I'm going to post this program on my blog, but that's what L. Ron Hubbard wanted to do. He wanted to make Scientology indispensable, but to do so, L. Ron Hubbard had to control all of Scientology's press and all of its media. That's what he had to do. And that's a pretty big burden. So I'm going to make a few points before I begin. Dianetics and Scientology began as nonprofit secular businesses which sold self-help courses based upon Hubbard's techniques. Dianetics did not use an e-meter. Hubbard relabeled and relaunched Dianetics as Scientology in late 1951, but really in early 1952. He did so by using Volume-Athenson's e-meter and saying that while Dianetics treated the mind, Scientology treated the spirit. So early Dianetics, what I called phase one or early gen Scientology, was 1950 to 1954. So Hubbard's building an organization during that time. And so in a nutshell, Hubbard's having a hard time with the press. He's getting a lot of critical press, including his messy divorce from his second wife, Sarah Northrop, who said he was insane. In fact, she said to the media, as reported in the LA Times and other newspapers, that L. Ron Hubbard said that if Sarah really loved her, he would kill herself to save his reputation. So from, Hubbard going way back before he even started Dianetics, had that kind of mindset. If you love me, you would kill yourself to spare me and help me keep my reputation. Horrible things. We're going to get into an interesting document to start, and I'm going to get it up on the screen. So let me get this here for you, and it's called, interesting updates from Windows. So I'm going to just bear with me for a moment. I had all my windows prepared, and then they go out, and okay, this is going to be it. Okay, so we're going to go back. Thank you for bearing with me. Everyone who's here, which Bella, glad to be here. Glad to be here. Thank you. Sweet Liberty, Scott, also known as CO Bill, which cracks me up, that name. This is an important document. Back in the 1950s, L. Ron Hubbard published the Journal of Scientology. He also published an Ability magazine. Now, Ability, this is called Ability Major. They had Ability Minor, but Ability, this is called the Manual on Dissemination of Material. I will post it along with this podcast on my blog, the Scientology Money Project. So this is the key foundational document where we first see in early Scientology what would become fair game. This document is so important. If you're a serious researcher or just general public and who wants to understand the foundations, this is the document. And it is written by L. Ron Hubbard. And the document is basically, it lays out his game plan of what he wants to do. This could be argued in a much lesser vein, of course, to be Scientology, or Hubbard's version, rather, of Mein Kampf, My Struggle. Now, Hubbard lays out his case, quote, in the highlighted portion, quote, Scientologists everywhere, when an organization of force and purpose was, to a large extent, lacking, were victimized and brought into disrepute by persons who could express vast opinions about Scientology, yet who knew nothing about Scientology. Now, that's a key thing. Hubbard has always presented Scientologists as basically a group of people who are being attacked by nefarious outsiders. And so that's Hubbard's positioning. And again, Hubbard wants to make Scientology indispensable. The only way he can do it is to control its messaging. And the only way he can control its messaging is by engaging in censorship. Where censorship doesn't work, he has to engage in a fair game. And that's how it works. So let's go back to this this particular document we were sharing, and I'm going to get back on again. So we're back at Ability Major, which is the name of Scientology magazine. I don't know where he gets that name, but he does. So in this 24-page document, it really does lay out quite a bit of Hubbard's thinking, and I've highlighted certain portions of it. It's well worth the read. So he describes Scientology, and I wanted to, he talks about it's as precise as mathematics, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm just going to scroll through it. Now, here's what Hubbard's saying. He wants to control what the general public, that is you and I, are saying to each other about Scientology. So Hubbard wants to control messaging. And this is really what he wants to say. Quote, there are several things we would like the general public to say to the general public about Scientology, unquote. And in Scientology, you have flow, and what this is called others to others. He wants to control what others are saying to others in the general public about Scientology. So let's go back again and start quote. There are several things we would like the general public to say to the general public about Scientology. The first of these is that we would like the general public, when it sees an individual or group problem, to be quite certain that the proper thing to do is for that individual or group to consult a Scientologist. For instance, if somebody is having headaches, we would like his friends to come to the obvious solution that this person should see a Scientologist or should join a group undergoing processing. Now, that is very interesting. So L. Ron Hubbard wants to say that Scientology is indispensable, and the general public should always come to the conclusion that if there's a problem, they should approach Scientology. So that if your friend at work says, I'm having a headache, you should say, oh, you should go to Scientology. And we see this later when Tom Cruise, in his leaked Go to Guns video, that's when where he's wearing the black turtleneck, and he's using a fighter pilot term saying go to guns, meaning switch from missiles to guns to attack. In that leaked video, Tom says that Scientology, that he says, we are the authorities on the mind, on getting people off drugs, on literacy, etc. So that's that attitude here, is that L. Ron Hubbard early on wanted you to tell others that they should consult Scientology for problems, or if you had a problem, he wanted others to tell you that you should consult Scientology. But things got in the way and that prevented you from referring Scientology to your friends as a member of the general public. So let's jump back on. Now, what he says is, beginning with that right here, quote, we are not interested in sensationalism, or the complexity of Scientological methodology being discussed by the general public. Now, that's amazing. Hubbard is trying to define what the general public may or may not say. So he seems to be contradictory. He wants Scientology to be the solution for everything, but he doesn't want the general public discussing the complexities. This foreshadows Scientology not wanting the general public to discuss the OT levels and its other secrets, including its dirty contracts, knowledge reports, the things it did in the Danny Masterson essay case, where it's trying to silence victims. So no, this is Hubbard's self-serving at its worst. So he again says, quote, we are not interested in sensationalism, personalities, or the complexity of Scientological methodology being discussed by the general public. Now, what Hubbard is saying is what John Travolta says, would later say, and what all Scientologists say is, go read a book and find out for yourself. We do not want the complexities discussed. So you can't have it both ways, but Hubbard is really, again, you see him as a tyrant saying, this is what is on the table for discussion. Read a book, Scientology self-help. But what's off the table are the what we do and how we do it, our treacherous ways, our machinations, our spying, etc. That's not on the table for discussion. Neither are the OT levels or the clear cognition that I am mocking up my own reactive mind. So he says, quote, as a subdivision of this, we do not want Scientology to be reported in the press anywhere else than on the religious pages of newspapers. So there, Hubbard's laying out a boundary. The only place we want Scientology reported on is in the religious pages of newspapers. Now, for those of you who are younger than I am, much, much younger, who were maybe born out when newspapers were going out of style, back in the day when newspapers were printed, they had a religious column or a religious section, and it would list all the churches in the area and how it would have religious discussions about things like prayer in school, how they need to bring back prayer in school, or would have discussions about whatever religious issues. The editor of the religious column of the newspaper felt. So Hubbard wanted to confine Scientology after it was made, he incorporated as a religion in 1954. He wanted to limit its discussion. So he wanted to limit what you could say about Scientology, and he wanted to limit newspapers to where they could discuss Scientology. Again, this is censorship and control. Back to the document. Quote, he says, it is destructive of word of mouth to permit the public presses to express their biased and badly reported sensationalism. Therefore, we should be very alert. Therefore, we should be very alert to sue for slander at the slightest chance, so as to discourage the public presses from mentioning Scientology. Unquote. So there, you have it in 1955. Hubbard, that's where he decides that we, meaning Scientology, should be very alert to sue for slander anyone mentioning Scientology in the media. And that would be the newspapers and the radio, early television. We should be alert to sue for slander. So in the early 1955 period, L. Ron Hubbard basically laid down his guidelines. We'll tell you what you can talk about Scientology. You should recommend Scientology. No sensationalism reporting about me, L. Ron Hubbard, or about Scientology. If you do, we'll sue you for slander. So back before the internet existed, there used to be these services called clipping services, and they were scattered all throughout the United States, and they would subscribe to every newspaper in the area. So if you were in Los Angeles or New York or Florida, any big city, New York, Chicago, Philadelphia, Seattle, these clipping services, you could hire them and say, I want you to clip out all the newspaper stories you find each day concerning Scientology. And these clipping services, which were the pre-Google search engines, would read the newspapers, would read the magazines, and they would physically clip out newspaper articles that were either positive or negative or had any mention of Scientology, and they would mail them to L. Ron Hubbard's headquarters there in Phoenix or in California, New York, wherever he was, and he would review them, and they would decide whether or not they should sue for slander. And usually they would hire attorneys, and they would demand a retraction, an apology, or to have the newspaper reporter fired. So Fair Game starts big in 1955 with Hubbard's instructions to sue for slander. And but it gets worse than that. We're going to return to this core document. So he says, a quote, therefore, we should be very alert to sue for slander at the slightest chance, so as to discourage the public presses from mentioning Scientology. Now, what he's saying there, we should sue at the slightest chance. Hubbard wants to put a chilling effect in action. That's what it's called. He wants to chill the press. You better think about what you write about Scientology, or we will sue you, and worse. Back to the document. Quote, What the newspapers say is not word of mouth. As an example of this, how many minutes today have you spent discussing current events? Newspaper reporters writing articles in Scientology do not express Scientology. So Hubbard says, no, we don't get, newspaper reporters are biased. They're not reporting on Scientology. They're sensationalistic. So he's calling them phony. And then he says, quote, Scientologists should never let themselves be interviewed by the press. That's experience talking. And so that's why this important thing, again, Aaron Smith Levin has brought it up many times. I think it's a great point that Aaron makes, and others have made it too. Mike Rinder has made it, Leah, I've made it. But a key thing to notice is that Scientologists do not make themselves available for interviews. When they've tried to do so, it's met with disaster. We saw certainly Tommy Davis's reign as international spokesman not go over too well. And David Miscavige has only given one interview on TV, and that was in, I believe, 1991. And it's been put out. It was on Nightline with Ted Koppel, and Ted Koppel won an Emmy for that reporting. And David Miscavige said, "I'm the reason Ted Koppel won the Emmy. Never mind that Ted Koppel has spent decades as a newsman honing his skills and his craft. It was David Miscavige's appearance." But this is a really interesting fact. Quote, Scientologists should never let themselves be interviewed by the press. That's experience talking. So Hubbard did not like that. And the document goes on, and Hubbard's laying out the rules of what you can and can't do and how to relate to psychiatrists, medical doctors, psychiatrists. And he's talking, there's an interesting thing here. Quote, should you ever be arrested for practicing Scientology, treating people, make very sure that you've never used drugs or surgery. That came about because there was a few Scientologists arrested in the 1950s. One in particular, his name's Ed, EDD. I don't recall his last name, but he said, call headquarters immediately and we'll get you a lawyer. But this is interesting. He said, if you do get arrested for practicing Scientology, and you don't normally only get arrested, this fellow, Ed, EDD, was arrested for saying that he could cure diseases by using Scientology. In all such cases of arrest for the practices of Scientology, the HASI, that's the Hubbard Association of Scientologists International, that's the precursor of the International Association of Scientologists, will send a representative at once, but do not wait for his arrival to place this suit, meaning to sue. The suit or lawsuit must already have been filed when the attorney arrives. So he's saying sue right away. And Hubbard's colorful language, look at that. Quote, cause blue flame to dance on the courthouse roof until everybody has apologized profusely for having dared to become so adventurous as to arrest a Scientologist who, as a minister of the church, has gone about his regular duties, unquote. So Hubbard there is telling you how to act. This is really actually fun. I'm going to highlight it. So you're to raise holy hell, file a lawsuit, scream that you're a minister and they're getting in your way. And so Hubbard relates some personal experiences where he had some problems there. Now, this next section is very important. Quote, this is L. Ron Hubbard writing, quote, the defense of anything is untenable. The only way to defend anything is to attack. And if you ever forget that, then you will lose every battle you are ever engaged in, whether it is in terms of personal conversation, public debate, or a court of law. Never be interested in charges. Do yourself much more charging and you will win. And the public, seeing that you won, will then have a communication line to the effect that Scientologists win. Don't ever let them have any other thought than Scientology takes all of its objectives. Now, what L. Ron Hubbard is saying here is that the defense of anything is untenable. So he's saying never, never, um, never defend, always attack. And that's why Scientologists, if you ask them a question, they'll go on the attack. And my neighbor, John Roker, famously here in Los Feliz, met Bodie and Jenna Elfman on the street walking here right by Griffith Park. And John had a shirt on that said, John Travolta is gay. And on the back, it said, so is Tom Cruise. So Jenna Elfman, and this is, you can look this up on the internet. It's a true story. So Jenna Elfman immediately screams at John Roker, how many babies have you raped? Like, she went on the attack. She went crazy. And so there's Nasty Nathaniel. You're too, you also are fascinating, Nasty Nathaniel. So this is Hubbard saying go on the attack, crush them, so that word gets around that we are very dangerous to deal with. We're going to go back to this screen. The defense of anything is untenable. So, ladies and gentlemen, and you have to remember that Scientologists, their mindset is they're going to attack you. So these are not reasonable people. They don't claim to be reasonable. They think reasonableness is a disease and a bad thing and a weak man. You're weak. You're a weak man or woman if you are reasonable. And so he says, never be interested in charges. Do yourself much more charging. What that means, I'll give you an example. When I was writing on Xenu.net, 2005 to 2010, along with my other colleagues there at the board, I had a handler named Suzanne Marie, and she or he was obviously an OSA, OSA. And I published one time, David Miscavige issued in one of the magazines when they were doing the basics. They were selling those basics books, those $5,000 libraries, which were, I guess, David Miscavige's improved versions of L. Ron Hubbard's Unreadable Crap, because that's what David Miscavige said, that SP transcriptionists from the wrong side of the gene pool, you had to buy a new, $5,000 set of basics libraries and donate $5,000 for, 12 sets. So that's 60,000 to go to libraries, etc. Anyway, they had a feature called The World's Youngest Basic Completion. And there was a teenage girl, about 14, and she was the world's youngest basic completions. And they mailed this out to the public. I posted it on Xenu.net showing the world's youngest basics completion. And then Suzanne Marie, who was an OSA, my OSA handler at Xenu.net, said, I'm going to report you for posting a picture of this underage, this minor on Xenu.net. So that she was threatening to report me to, I guess, the authorities for posting pictures of something they had mailed to me through the U.S. Post Office to my home on an unsolicited basis. They were going to sue me. So I said to Suzanne Marie, taking a page from LRH's playbook, I said, Suzanne Marie, I welcome an investigation into David Miscavige by the California Department of Child Protective Services for using a picture of a minor in a publicly distributed Scientology magazine. And she tried to turn it around on me, but I kept repeating that. I used a Scientology technique called TR3. So I was almost in mocking her, but I was saying, I welcome an investigation into David Miscavige for using a picture of a minor. And he should be investigated by the California Child Protective Services. But you get the point. That's the Scientology technique. When you say, why are you covering up for this criminal, Danny Masterson, they will automatically turn it around as an automaticity, as part of their training, saying, why are you attacking my religion? Don't you believe that all people should have the right to believe what they want? Why are you attacking my religion? So Hubbard is saying deflect, control, attack the other person, do a lot more charging. So when you bring up why do you have these unconscionable contracts that lock people into binding arbitration? They'll say, why are you attacking my religion? What do you have to hide? What crimes are you hiding? What are your crimes? How many babies have you raped? That is, that looks insane unless you understand Scientology. Now, it is insane, but you have to understand it comes from an insane person, but it's a way to be brutal, to deflect, and to try to control the dialogue and engage in censorship. And it is part of fair game. So let's get back to the document. So that's what Hubbard is instructing people to do. And this again is in 1955. Again, another famous component of what would later become fair game. Quote, the law can be used very easily to harass, and enough harassment on somebody who is simply on the thin edge anyway, well knowing that he is not authorized, will generally be sufficient to cause his professional decease. If possible, of course, ruin him utterly. So this was L. Ron Hubbard's policy, basically saying the lawsuit can be used to harass. And if you put enough pressure on somebody, you can cause them to lose their job, to lose their professional reputation, or hopefully ruin them utterly. So that what Hubbard is saying. And it's interesting that this harassment is directed against people who are not bowing to Hubbard's will to, make Scientology indispensable. So again, that's his game plan. Back to the document. It's an interesting thing. He's talking about religion, and Scientology uses interfaith movements. Hubbard says, quote, in addressing persons professionally interested in the ministry, we have another interesting problem in public presentation. We should not engage in religious discussions. In the first place, as Scientologists, we are agnostics, which is to say that we know what we know. Now, this is a little, I'm going to jump in here on a comment. So, first of all, Hubbard wants Scientology discussed nowhere but on the pages of religious newspapers. I'm sorry, Hubbard only wants Scientology discussed in the religious section of the newspapers. And I guess if OSA updated the policy, Scientology should only be discussed in online interfaith movements like the counterfeit interfaith movement of cult apologists called Cheshire, which is run by the fraud Massimo Introvigne. So these cult apologists are exactly the sock puppets for OSA. They are what Hubbard wanted. They're a bunch of frauds who pivot to interfaith, and they will not discuss Scientology's OT levels. They will not discuss human trafficking or anything serious about Scientology. They will speak in vague terms, aphorisms, as paid cult apologists. And so when you look at Massimo Introvigne, Donald Westbrook, and the other G. Gordon Melton, you look at the other frauds Scientology hires, that's what Hubbard wants. These idiots who will play ball. And that's just nonsense. But a statement that Hubbard slips in here, he says, in the first place, he says, quote, in the first place, as Scientologists, we are agnostics, which is to say, we know that we know. That is such a non sequitur. Well, first of all, here's Hubbard saying he's a Gnostic. So if you have any question about how Hubbard defines Scientology, it's as Gnosticism. And that's the idea of a world-making demiurge who's evil, taking spirits down from a higher power level down into this physical plane of desire and suffering and pain. And Hubbard's really not defining Gnosticism well. That also speaks to his time in Thelema. So all I want to say is he makes a non sequitur statement, quote, we are Gnostics, which is to say that we know, unquote. That's a tautology. Scientology is saying that we know what we know simply means certainty, which is what Scientology is all about. They can give you certainty. You can know what you know, but the correct way of saying this is we believe what we believe. And they're firmly entrenched in what they believe. So they know what they know, and that's what L. Ron Hubbard tells them to think. So cutting through some of the crap there. Let's go back to this document. He says, quote, people in the ministry ordinarily suppose that knowingness and knowledge are elsewhere resident than in themselves. They believe in belief and substitute belief for wisdom. This makes Scientology no less a religion, but it makes it a religion with an older tradition and puts it on an intellectual plane. This is sort of Hubbard. He wants to say that we're above all other religions. We know that we know, and these other religions merely believe beliefs. So again, that's his messaging and positioning to Scientologists where he wants to put them. So back to the document. This is interesting when you look at Scientology and its phony interfaith efforts. Quote, the way to handle an individual minister of some other church is as follows. Get him to tell you exactly what he believes. Get him to agree that religious freedom is desirable. Then tell him to make sure that if that's the way he believes, he should keep on believing that, and that you would do anything to defend his right to believe that. So Hubbard wants to evade when this is Scientology's phony interfaith movement. Tell us what you believe. Oh, you're Islamic. Very good. You should keep on being Islamic, and we'll defend your right to believe that. And what he's really saying is, you leave us alone. Don't question our religion. We'll leave you alone and not question your religion. And so let's defend each other's right to be how we are. So Hubbard doesn't not want to discuss religion. That's off the table. And he wants to basically play softball with other religions where we don't attack each other. And that way we can protect our tax exemptions mutually, even though we may use child labor and engage in SA and cover up some pretty bad things. Now, Scientologists, the general public, this is really important. I'm only going to read part of it, but Hubbard says, quote, a Scientologist, when addressing public groups, would never, under any circumstance, confuse his communication line by engaging in a debate from the floor or closing terminals with any person who would care to heckle him. That is exactly what, that's exactly the pith of the matter. Hubbard did not want to be heckled. He's not a guy who could take the floor and be heckled. So he's telling Scientologists, do not engage in debate where you could be heckled. Stay away from it. And that shows just how thin-skinned L. Ron Hubbard and Scientology are and why they don't engage in debate. I have challenged Massimo Introvigne to a debate online. He was actually here in LA in October, and I missed him, or I would have went and seen him appear. But these great, supposedly these sociologists, these great intellectuals and religious scholars, they don't debate on behalf of Scientology. They don't have to. Scientologists don't debate. They don't do apologetics. So Hubbard was saying attack, never defend. So part of refusing to debate, a debate in Hubbard's mind would be defending Scientology, which you never do. You never defend it. You never debate it. You attack and attack and attack, engage in character assassination, smears, slurs, blackmail, but you do not defend. And Hubbard's saying, we're going to control the narrative about Scientology. However, the free press said, no, try it, sue us, we'll fight. And so let's go back to this document. So Hubbard's saying never debate where you can be heckled. And the reason, tyrants don't like humor. They don't want to be heckled. And he says, quote, by simply ignoring such people, one continues to talk to the bulk of the people who are themselves very interested. So this next paragraph, quote, similarly, no Scientologist would ever consent to take a position on a panel or on a stage engaging in a debate of Scientology versus some other subject. So, in other words, you couldn't debate Scientology versus Christianity or Scientology versus whatever. Hubbard is saying people are not interested in debate, which is untrue. People love debate. And it's interesting, Hubbard said, quote, "In the last 5 years, I have turned down innumerable offers of debates, for I have found out that Dianetics or Scientology were the attraction and that medicine or psychology was using the public interest in this new subject in order to further their own aims. And that any such debate engaged upon demeaned and degraded Scientology by permitting it to be talked about contemptuously before a group, a thing which should never be permitted," he screams in all caps. So what we see here is Hubbard is saying people use Scientology to try to gain popularity for themselves. They're trying to get famous or notoriety at our expense. And he's also saying you should never permit Scientology to be talked about contemptuously before a group. This should never be permitted. And that's why when Trey Parker and Matt Stone of South Park aired that, the church was pissed because that was contemptuous. They talked about Scientology with satire, which was contemptuous. And Hubbard did not like that at all. So this document continues at length, and it does lay down, like I said, it's their version of Mein Kampf, it's the instructions. And I'm not going to read this, but basically, this does not allow Scientologists to talk to each other about their case. One interesting thing that happens, Hubbard censorship goes so far that when you're receiving auditing in Scientology, you can't talk about it to your wife, your husband, your spouse, your significant other, your friends. So Hubbard goes so far, and Scientology goes so far, that you can't even talk about what's going on with you in Scientology to anyone else. You can only talk about your case, your reactive mind, or your BTs in session with your auditor while you're paying and the clock is running. That's it. You do not talk about your lived experience of Scientology outside of session. You're allowed to write a success story in which you said, "Hey, I got a lot of wins out of that level I just completed, and I want to thank L. Ron Hubbard and CLBRTC, Mr. David Miscavige." Now, we're going to shift into some other really, really wicked stuff. I want to share the screen and give you some really interesting resources to use. So let me find this. Okay, now I'm going to share this screen. Now, when during Aftermath, Leah Remini and Mike Rinder's show, they really went to town on Mike Rinder and Leah Remini, and they attacked them. And I was covering this, and this is one of my blog posts. I'm just going through some materials, and there's the Greg and Janet during banjos, and so the point I wanted to get here, I wanted to talk about these are the basic elements of fair game that come from the 1955 document. Of course, there was the SP Fair Game Order, where Hubbard wrote that people may suppress a person, which is you if you're listening to this. You may, quote, be deprived of property or injured by any means by any Scientologist without any discipline of the Scientologist, may be tricked, sued, or lied to or destroyed, unquote. That's pretty mind-blowing when you think of it. You can be tricked, lied to, sued, or destroyed if you run afoul of Scientology. Now, of course, Scientology famously claimed that L. Ron Hubbard revoked fair game, but he didn't. He just said you couldn't use it in public relations statements. So we're going to go back to this. So Hubbard's saying, ruin them utterly. And then Hubbard says, quote, "This is the correct procedure. Spot who is attacking us. Start investigating them promptly for felonies or worse using our own professionals, not outside agencies. Double curve our reply by saying we welcome an investigation of them. Start feeding lurid blood, sex, crime, and actual evidence on the attackers to the press. Don't ever tamely submit to an investigation of us. Make it rough on the attackers all the way. Now, that's what Hubbard is saying. You treat every skirmish as a war. You make it rough. You start feeding information to the press. And after the newspaper era, of course, means you post hate pages. If you can't find anything on people, you attack their character. You engage in character assassination. You make things up. There's an operative out there. He doesn't know how thoroughly he's been investigated. He has no idea. He has no idea what's known about him, but he's an operative. That's just a side note. And I'll leave it at that. And it's not who you think it is either. It's not who you think it is. Okay. So Hubbard, this is where they get into outright lying. Hubbard writes, I'm going to go back here. If attacked on some vulnerable point by anyone or anything or any organization, always find or manufacture enough threat against them to cause them to sue for peace. So Hubbard says, if you can't find any dirt on them, then just make it up, lie about them. That is how sleazy, dishonest, corrupt, and criminal Scientology is. They'll just flat out make stuff up to ruin you. They'll lie about it. So I've said many, many times, the central principle of Scientology's own existence is lying. It lies even when it doesn't need to lie. It just lies because that's the central principle of its own existence, is lying and fair game. Now, the next point, Hubbard said, the purpose of the lawsuit, is to harass rather than to win. The law can be used very easily to harass, and enough harassment on somebody who's simply on the thin edge anyway, knowing well that he's not authorized, will generally be sufficient to cause his professional decease, if possible, ruin him utterly. That comes from the manual I've been quoting on. Now, this is a point that's been some debate. Hubbard wrote, the only way you can control is to lie to them. He says, you can write that down in your book in great big letters. The only way you can control anybody is to lie to them. So Scientology is not above using lies to control. Now, there's some context for that, but it's there. So clearly, those are the elements of fair game. And I'm going to turn you on to something here. It's an old term that some people don't know about, but you should, because it's very, very important. So let me stop that screen sharing and get you another screen. There was a former Guardian's Office, OSA type, Frank Oliver. This is on my blog, and this is known as the Frank Oliver Hat Pack. And Frank Oliver worked for the Department of Special Affairs, or Office of Special Affairs. This is pretty mind-blowing, and this I will post in the show notes and on my blog. I have it on my blog already. You can see right there. This is pretty mind-blowing. I'm going to enlarge it here. So this gives pretty much the actual manual on how to perform fair game. And I thank Frank Oliver for posting this. And it's very laid out. I'm going to switch over to a better source that's slightly better. Let me get here. I want to go to the WikiLeaks page. So give me a minute here. Oh, it looks like, okay. Oh, this is an interesting thing, but that's not what I'm looking for. We're going to go back to the Frank Oliver Hat Pack. And I'm sorry, just bear with me. I have a lot of windows open. Here it is. Oh, those were the budget cuts. That's an interesting, interesting. That's not what I wanted, but I'm going to go. Okay, so this is what I wanted to share. Thank you for waiting. Now, WikiLeaks actually has the Frank Oliver Hat Pack. I have the PDF on my blog. It's been out a long time, but look at this document inventory. And this describes Department 20. And Karen, if you want to put something in the comments about Department 20. So this is the training that OSA agents have to go through. Here's, for example, a noisy investigation drill sheet. That's where you have PI show up to harass you. You have overt data collection. You have to study the Manual of Justice by L. Ron Hubbard, which is a pretty filthy thing I want to do a show on. Daily battle plan check sheet. That's how you're going to handle suppressives, enemy action. So this really gives you researchers, lawyers, people at the United States Department of Justice, states attorneys general. This gives you the playbook. OSA network order, black propaganda. It says internal policy defining covert communication of false data intended to injure, impede, or destroy those who are deemed an enemy of the organization. So this OSA network order, this is how refined fair game is. I want the public to know it's not just fair game is not just an abstract thing. It's a very real thing. It's a very, very real thing. And it it goes to a formal organized structure that's been laid out in quite a high level of detail, as you're looking at right now. And I've got to get back to where I am. Thank you for your patience. Okay, so I'm just going through a lot of windows. Okay, so you can see the WikiLeaks page, and the print is somewhat small, but it's pretty stunning on just how much. I'm going to enlarge this a little bit. That's what I was trying to do. Okay, so this OSA network order, it shows you how to use false data designed to injure, impede, or destroy those who are deemed an enemy of the organization. That is pretty mind-blowing when you have that sort of actually how to design black propaganda. And it also has willful false reports, and it's based upon Hubbard's theory that governments are insane and therefore an enemy that needs to be handled. Now, the United States government should know that tax exemption cannot violate public policy. And this is why I think Scientology should be deemed a terrorist organization. Willful false reports. Quote, internal policy labeled secret that expands upon Hubbard's theory that governments are insane and therefore an enemy that needs to be handled. Now, that's important for this reason. Scientology is a terrorist organization because it believes that the United States government is insane and needs to be handled. This was proven when Scientology organized Snow White, program Snow White, and systematically burglarized the IRS, even the Coast Guard, in other U.S. departments and collected over 100,000 pages of documents from U.S. government agencies that had burglarized. So you can't have an organization that views the United States government as criminal, that you're infiltrating. You can't have that as a policy. You can't be adverse to public policy, that is the laws of the United States or any other country. But let's talk about the United States. I think Scientology should be categorized as a terrorist organization by the United States government, and this is based on the evidence, which I'm showing you from its own documents. It tells you how to, here at Network Order 32, it defines the strategies to use to investigate and handle the spreading of false reports, harassment, and genocide by government, intelligence estimate, mechanism of attack and defense. So this should frighten you, that Scientology at its core, it says, quote, internal policy defining the general mindset behind covert operations orchestrated by Office of Special Affairs, as well as the mentality for planning mechanisms of attack and defense against their perceived enemies. So right here, Scientology is saying it engages in covert operations to this day, because these documents have never been withdrawn. They are part of Scientology policy. Now, Scientology can call them scriptures, but that's a propagandistic feint of this terrorist organization, the psycho-terrorist organization, and sometimes it engages in, literal psycho-terrorism, and it crosses the line. So this Frank Oliver Hat Pack really is a treasure trove of data, and it should be, it's something the government should be made aware of. It's something you should educate yourself on. It's something you should send to your elected political officials in the United States. And it's pretty mind-blowing. If you actually print it out into 3 volumes, it's probably, 10 inches of documents. And this is stunning. So when you look at the Frank Oliver Hat Pack, you can see Fair Game from 1955 was codified into OSA policy, first Guardian's Office policy, and then it was codified into OSA policy. OSA is the successor of the Guardian's Office. So that's how extreme it is. That's how extreme it is. Now, how is it that Mary Sue took the blame when it is his own hand that wrote these policies? Well, Sweet Liberty, Mary Sue Hubbard got thrown under the bus. Here's what happened in a nutshell. Hubbard appointed her as the guardian, and so she was operational, and Mary Sue's lawyers thought she had a chance to go into court and fight, and L. Ron Hubbard told Bill Franks, then executive director of the National Church of Scientology of California, to just yank all of Mary Sue Hubbard's legal funds, stop them. He told Bill Franks, and Bill Franks told me this, I have it on tape on an interview with Bill Franks, that Mary Sue's not going to go to trial. And basically he threw her under the bus. So Hubbard, when push comes to shove, as I've said, the most dangerous job in the Church of Scientology is being the wife of the leader. Mary Sue Hubbard went to prison, and then she went into exile under house arrest for the rest of her life after she got out of jail. And Shelley Miscavige, of course, has gone into exile. So there you go. So yeah, when you say, I'm going to get this comment. Becky, Sam, question. Who gets to see these documents? What rank and departments? I think not the public Scientologists. Becky, Sam, you are correct. The public Scientologists do not get to see these. They don't get to see these. And Leah Remini told me that she was never aware that these documents even existed when she was a public Scientologist. The church is not going to show public Scientologists how dirty and filthy and corrupt they are. Question to someone like Bob Duggan, billionaire. Bob, seeing these documents that clearly violate public policy, they clearly are antithetical to the best interests of the United States of America and its security. This calls for spying, espionage, defense, infiltration. My question to someone like Bob Duggan, how can you donate $360 million plus to defend Scientology? I mean, you as an American citizen who've made your wealth as a self-made billionaire, you're paying to defend this corrupt psycho-terrorist organization, and you're part of it. They either have something on you or you believe in it. I don't know. Only you know, Bob. But I think it's pretty disgraceful. When you become aware of it, when you gain knowledge of it, then you become culpable. So it's Scientologists, the public don't want to know. It's like, don't tell me about it. I don't want to know how bad it is, because then they'd be forced to make a moral choice that might cost them their family or their income. So yeah, that's a great question. So there's some other questions. Yeah, the comments are very good. Again, Becky, thanks, Jeffrey, to not only show the documents, but also to put them in context of the era of pre-Miscavige and how the documents lead to action. Yeah. Basically, these are the documents that are still control OSA's Office of Special Affairs. The only difference is they've had to be upgraded for the internet and social media. And we see the Stand League operating with the same vile tactics called for in Fair Game that we saw in 1955 with Hubbard. So nothing's changed except the technological format has had to be updated. Scientology Media Productions, Mitch Brisker told me that David Miscavige wanted Scientology Media Productions to be Scientology's version of the Anti-Defamation League. Of course, that failed. That whole $100 million project failed, and it became nothing but just bland Scientology programming. And they've had to go on to Twitter with their Stand League, their hate monitor, and they've become basically a hate group. Scientology is a hate group. When you look at social media, Fair Games, nothing but expressing lies, hate, psychoterror. And it all comes from these source documents. Now, one more document I want to share with you. Let me remove this. And it's called Target's Defense. So let's stop that and go to Target's Defense. This is one more pretty heavy duty policy. Okay, now Target's Defense. And again, this is, I put up my blog with some illustration. And I think Scientology's Playbook on Fair Game is another document. Again, this will be in my show notes. And there I have a scene from Wizard of Oz, because that's David Miscavige and his flying monkeys going out to spread their bullshit on the internet, all their vile and venom. They should all be in prison. The sadism of the Office of Special Affairs and its operatives and its hired PIs. If these private investigation firms, they know what they're doing. It's really bad karma to take cult blood money. That's on them. And when it falls apart, they're going to have some liability. So Target's Defense, it was a 1969 Hubbard Communications Office policy letter written by Hubbard and reissued after his death. Now, this is a damning article, a damning HCO, PL, meaning Hubbard Communications Office policy letter. This is still Scientology policy, Target's Defense. And Hubbard, in it writes, the errors we have made is defending rather than attacking. So his targets, and again, this makes an argument that they should be classified as a terrorist organization. The vital targets on which we must invest most of our time are depopularizing the enemy to a point of total obliteration. Scientology is not a religion, it's a psycho-terrorist organization because it wants to depopularize the enemy to a point of total obliteration. Scientology wants to destroy its enemies, obliterate them. That's not a religion, that's a terrorist organization. It also wants to take over the control or allegiance of the heads or proprietors of all news media. So it wants to control the media. It wants to take over the control or allegiance of key political figures. Well, it's succeeded with some certain people in the LAPD, certainly not the entire LAPD. That's vastly overstated. Certain people, like the former captain of LAPD, Corey Polka, but it does want to get to political figures. Colombia Police General, there's Police General in Peru, as I've documented, Congress people, for example, Frank Wolf, a retired congressman, never met a cult he didn't like. So this is where they're working at. And former Senator Sam Brownback, who I think, well, he's a fine man. He's a complete, he's been played for an idiot by a lot of cults that are smarter than him. Senator Sam Brownback is a member of a commission started under former President Trump that I think should be abolished because it's nothing but a propaganda organization. And Sam Brownback, I think he's a good man, but I think he's stupid when it comes to cults, or he's willingly blind. And that's the thing I want to do something on, is Senator Brownback and that group and how he operates with deviant groups to protect them. And so Hubbard also wanted to take control over the international finance. He wants to revitalize the societies. That just means make them Scientology-centered societies. Hubbard wants to win overwhelming public support. Now, Hubbard always had a thing where he wanted to be lauded, and he wanted to make Scientology indispensable. But I got to tell you, Ghost of L. Ron Hubbard and David Miscavige, Scientology is not going to win overwhelming public support. What is this? It has achieved, what Scientology has achieved is overwhelming public repudiation, and for all the right reasons. Yeah, when you're a terrorist organization and you cover up SA, you cover up child abuse, all kinds of horrible things, and you destroy people financially, you engage in credit card fraud, trafficking. I mean, yeah, you're not going to win overwhelming public support, and that's what's happened. And Hubbard said these, of course, are very long-range targets. So it gets worse. Our justification for doing these things is that Scientology is the only game where everyone wins. What are you fucking talking about? Excuse my language. Scientology is the only game where everyone wins. No, Scientology is the only game where David Miscavige and his inner circle of people who have a vested interest, including hired PIs and lawyers, only they win. Hubbard, a master of propaganda. If you think Scientology is the only game where everyone wins, no, it's the only game where a handful of people win, with David Miscavige at the top, and everyone else gets destroyed. So Hubbard identified the names and connections this time of the bitterly opposing enemy. Again, psychiatry and psychology, not medicine. So yeah, when Hubbard needed medical care because he drank so much, he had pancreatitis and he had heart problems. Yeah, Hubbard needed doctors. But he hated psychiatry and psychology. So Hubbard gave a carve out because he was getting old and sick and needed some doctors around. Several times Hubbard would have died if he hadn't had medical care, and he knows it. Oddly enough, he doesn't mention dentists because he had some kind of fear of dentists and would rather have those rotting, filthy teeth. So he also says that the heads of news media who are also directors of psychiatric front groups. So Hubbard, just as he saw BTs everywhere, he saw like these psychiatric front groups everywhere controlling the media. So he goes through his enemies, and this target's defense, again, it's just like it's a expansion of the 1955 manual, and he formalizes it and codifies it. And I've put it on Scribed. I'm going to put it in the show notes because I have to tell you, those who are listening, knowledge is power. The more we can get these documents out, the more we can make the case that Scientology should be classified a terrorist organization in the United States. I think that's the approach. A head-on approach against its tax exemption won't work. But if you start talking about it being a terrorist organization and here are the documents and it's violating public policy, there is a doctrine under United States law where you're not allowed to give tax exemptions to groups that are acting in ways that are contrary to U.S. law. You can't have it. So that's why I'm suggesting a pivot to trying to get Scientology classified as a terrorist group based on its own documents, because Fair Game is much larger than you think. It's actually a terrorist and psycho-terrorist program to destroy all opposition, to infiltrate the government of the United States, to steal documents, to engage in espionage, and to violate the law. And certainly the Chase Wave credit card fraud. Why criminal charges haven't been brought yet? Let's just stay on the word yet. So that's what I'm suggesting as a pivot, and that's what I'm going to be working on in my upcoming work, because I think that's where people need to go if you're really interested in taking down this monstrous church. Mother's Gari, absolutely no low for them. You are so correct. Just when you think it can't get any worse, Scientology gets much worse. And we saw that in the Danny Masterson trial. Becky Sam, it would show that the organization cannot fulfill the promise and is not less abusive and problematic than any other groups or parties. Well, that's an interesting question, but I think you're not going to go into the Latter-day Saints Church and find these documents that basically say that the United States government is the enemy of Scientology and that it's fundamentally insane. So these documents are pretty bad. So it's scorched earth. It is scorched earth. And that's kind of the origin. Again, you go back to that 1955 document. So I would encourage you to send that document off. So many people in the SPTV audience have contacts that are amazing with elected officials, government officials, and you never know. I told Karen a long time ago, there's always an invisible audience. We don't know who's listening or where it'll have an effect, but it will. I've been surprised by the people who've reached out to me, reach out to others in our community. And so these documents I showed you, when you lay them out and people in power understand what they're up against, you can make a difference. You can make a difference by doing it. So that's sort of the origin, is that 1955 manual. I'm going to, and the Frank Oliver hat pack certainly shows it. I had a couple other notes, but we don't need to go through those. And let me just make sure I haven't missed anything I wanted to share with you. Yeah, I'm going to go back to my, just to end up something that will help you. Okay, going back to Fair Game. So I noted that how Scientology began as a nonprofit business, and then Hubbard had to turn it into a religion for a lot of reasons. I just want to share you, this is why Hubbard pivoted. He said on an April 10 letter, this is from Russell Miller's Barefaced Messiah. Hubbard wrote a letter to Helen O'Brien, his secretary, and he writes in here, I await your reaction on the religion angle. Hubbard said, quote, "In my opinion, we couldn't get worse public opinion than we have had or have less customers with what we've got to sell. A religious charter would be necessary in Pennsylvania or New Jersey to make it stick, but I sure could make it stick." So, yeah, Hubbard had to pivot for all kinds of reasons to become a religion, and he became a very bad religion. This is how Hubbard thinks. Quote, "People who attack Scientology are criminals," unquote. That is the mindset. Hubbard seeks to dehumanize those who oppose or criticize Scientology by calling them criminals. Hubbard also said, quote, "Never treat a war like a skirmish, treat all skirmishes like wars." This is why he said, always attack, never defend. So when you're dealing with someone like that, a terrorist group has to dehumanize non-Scientologists, has to dehumanize critics. So we're suppressive persons, or we're wogs, or we're degraded beings. They have a lot of names to dehumanize us. This terrorist organization will dehumanize their opposition, and they'll also, if possible, ruin them utterly. And they are not fucking around. Scientology, L. Ron Hubbard said, is a deadly, serious activity. So be forewarned, but also don't be afraid of them, because the highest good is to oppose this tyranny. And everyone has to choose their battles. For those of you who believe, as I do, and so many others, that the Church of Scientology must lose its tax exemption, well, then let's get it declared a terrorist organization. And so that was my thinking, and that's why I wanted to present the history and what the solution, the best solution I think is to start going in that direction. And so with that, I'll leave it. Look forward to your comments. Thank you so much for listening for Surviving Scientology on YouTube. This is your host, Jeffrey Augustine. Please do like and subscribe. It makes a difference. It really does. We want to get the message out. So if you would like on Surviving Scientology and subscribe, that does make a difference. And Karen, and I so appreciate it. Thank you for your time. Please contact me, jeffreyaugustine@gmail.com, if you have something you'd like to discuss privately. Always appreciate any help from people in the legal community, in the law enforcement community. I can help you. I have documents. If you can help me, please reach out. I'm here. I'm a licensed private investigator in California. I can do a lot of things, and we have a lot of in-house resources. So again, for Surviving Scientology, thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.